Kia ora everyone. As been mentioned, I'm travelled over here from New Zealand. I am what we call a resource teacher of vision, which is a qualified teacher of children with vision impairments, and an orientation and mobility specialist as well. But today I'm here to talk to you about my CVI journey. So I want to share with you my CVI journey, a journey that started 21 years ago and a journey that I believe will never end. I first started this journey at the age of 16. When I suffered a bleed at the back of my brain on the left-hand side as a result of a blood vessel malformation I was born with. For the first 17 years of this journey, I was only aware of one aspect of my visual difficulties, an inability to see on the right-hand side, which is called a right-side hemianopia. Although at some level, I think I always knew there was this difficulty did not explain everything that was going on with my vision. However, when I left the hospital way back then, armed with only a basic diagnosis and limited rehabilitation strategies, learning to function in a world where I only saw half the visual field in front of me was enough of a challenge to cope with. So let me explain what life is like with the hemianopia. So this is a photo taken at a Ed Sheeran music concert that I attended last year. So this is what everyone would see that does not have a vision impairment or does not have a right side hemianopia. That is the scene that everyone would see. This is what my brain sees. So that information, my eyes see the first one, my brain sees that information, but my brain tells me that that's what I see. So I see the right side, the left side of the scene and the middle. It feels like that's everything, that's what the world is. That I just don't think that there is a right side to the world. So although there were many embarrassing and disheartening experiences relating to my hemianopia, over time, I developed strategies to make life easier and tried to move on the best I could. However, there was always small idiosyncrasies about my vision, strange difficulties that I just couldn't put my finger on and I certainly couldn't explain to others, which made me feel at times different from my peers and therefore very isolated. So when I was diagnosed with CVI in 2013, it completely changed my life. I finally had answers to the questions I didn't know how to ask, and I finally began to understand myself for the first time in a long time. The best part about it was that I was empowered by this true understanding of my impairment. So over the last 4.5 years, I have worked hard to firstly understand every little detail about this complicated visual impairment. And with that understanding, I have then tried to develop strategies to make living with this impairment easier. I have done this because I want to completely understand how my eyes see the world and how my brain interprets this information. Today I want to share with you what I have learned and what it is like to live each day with a different normal, because this might help you if you also have children that are living with a different normal. The best way for me to do this is to describe how CVI affects me in a situation that is relatively straightforward social encounter. Like most people, I am often invited out for dinner with different groups of people, family, friends, colleagues and acquaintances. However, unlike most people, at times I find this simple activity extremely challenging and stressful, especially if it is with people I do not know very well or am unfamiliar with the restaurant. Just the thought of going out to dinner can make me incredibly anxious, and if it is something I know about weeks in advance, the anxiety and stressing about this can completely consume me and I have no control over this. I also think it's important to note here that I believe these anxieties developed in the period when my CVI was undiagnosed, due to the many frightening and humiliating experiences that I had and didn't understand. So here are the anxieties that can sometimes overwhelm me before I even leave the house and enter the restaurant. It's really important to be able to have a really relaxing day at home before I head out, because if I am in a busy day at a scene which is hard for me to see, then I get to the restaurant tired and that's even harder for me to process what's going on. I also worry about whether I'm going to recognise people, because although I mostly recognise people because my visual acuity is quite good, when I'm stressed I have difficulty, and especially if they're not in the same context. Generally, if I've met people before, they may be wearing something different or they may be in a different place and it just doesn't make sense to me and I have trouble and they all end up looking the same, which has led to many embarrassing situations where I have greeted the wrong person or I have snobbed the person that I should have been talking to. I also worry about what is going to happen when I first arrive. If people call out to me, I have difficulty finding where they are because I have a lot of trouble auditory processing where the information is coming from. So I can hear people, but I can't visually locate them. So if someone calls me on that side, I may look over that side and not know where they are. I also get very stressed about people wanting to kiss me on the cheek, on the right-hand cheek, because I can't see them. So suddenly I'm there and a face appears in front of me and kisses me, which can be quite frightening at times. I also worry about what the restaurant is going to look like. I worry about whether it's going to be well lit or whether I'm going to be able to move through it easily, through the tables and chairs and other diners, or will the space be so crowded with lots of furniture, people and decorations that I will be completely distracted and unable to map the room effectively. So for instance, a simple cafe scene like this would turn into that for me. I also worry about who I'll be sitting next to, because if I'm sitting next to people that understand my visual difficulties, they will make allowances for my potential clumsiness and mishaps. But if I'm sitting to people that don't know about my vision, I might completely shock them and knock over their glasses. So a scene like this with this many wine glasses and glasses at a table simply becomes that for me, which hugely increases the chance of me knocking over something. I also worry about whether I'm going to be able to sit into a location that will allow me to see as much as possible. For instance, will I be able to face into a blank wall so that I am not distracted by the visual information and can actually focus on the people I'm talking to? Otherwise, a scene like that just becomes like that for me. I also worry about whether the menu is going to be in a plain font on an uncluttered page so that I can actually read it, or am I going to have to get someone to read it to me because the font size is too fancy and cursive and there is too much clutter on the page for me to be able to read the information. I also worry about whether I'm going to remember to look for the food on my plate, or will I forget that my plate has the right side, because as I've explained, a plate that looks like this for everyone else, I'm only seeing that, and my brain's telling me I'm seeing that. And what also happens, so on top of my right side heminopia, I also have what's called right side hemi-inattention. So quite often I can actually forget that I have a right side, which seems quite strange. But I only learnt that recently, and the way that I learnt is that I was trying to remember to look to my right when I was in America crossing roads, and so I put my watch on my right-hand side, right? And I went around for the whole week thinking, I didn't put my watch on today. Why didn't I put my watch on today? And never for once thinking to look at my right-hand side that the watch was on my right arm. So quite often I'll leave food on the plate. I also worry about whether I'm going to be able to see where the bathroom is and whether I'm going to be able to get there by myself, or whether I'm going to need someone to take me, which as an independent adult is not something I generally like having to do. I think about whether people will be able to hear, I'll be able to hear people when they're talking to me, or will be too much background noise and visual information to process that I cannot focus on what people are saying. I worry that I would become too anxious that I won't be able to talk to anyone, and I can't think of the words that I want to say. I also worry that at what point am I going to become too fatigued to make sense of the visual scene around me and not be able to string a sentence together, because when I become too overwhelmed, I can't talk, I can't think. My cognitive abilities all abandon me. I also worry about how long do I have to stay and pretend to be coping with the situation, and how am I going to be able to hold it together so that I don't embarrass myself. And probably important for children is I also worry about what point I'm going to let my partner down. At what point am I going to have to make him leave the situation what he's really enjoying. As you can imagine, this level of anxiety has a huge impact on me, and this is before I even leave the house. So the time I arrive at the restaurant, I'm often incredibly stressed, exhausted, emotional, and very close to Cvi Meltdown. So Cvi Meltdown is a state of being that hasn't been in any literature, and it's just something that I have experienced and understand, is when I get to a point that I'm too visually overwhelmed or too stressed in the situation, I completely shut down. And if you have a child that has a Cvi Meltdown, they would have a tantrum, or they would cry, like Helen was talking about with the fingers being slammed in the door. Obviously I'm an adult, and I know it's not okay to sit on the floor and cry, and I try not to. So I basically shut down, and I can't see, I can't hear, I cannot think straight. You can ask me a question and I will just look at you completely blankly and stupidly. I feel that my vision is hugely reduced. I struggle to be social and interact with the people around me, and sometimes I can't even think straight. To those that know about my visual difficulties, they may understand to a degree. To those that are not aware of my invisible disability, I come across as rude, aloof, uninterested, unintelligent, and strange. And this is generally not a very good first impression. Of course, over time, dealing with this kind of experiences led to feelings of insecurity, constant doubt, and an almost crippling fear of entering the world and doing the things that others were doing, like going out for dinner, going to parties, visiting crowded public places, and being alone in a unfamiliar environment. It generally took a great deal of determination and stubbornness to force myself to do these things, and sometimes it just seemed easier to stay at home and never leave the house. And all because I didn't have the opportunity to develop strategies to make things easier, because I had no idea what the actual problem was. Once I understood the reason for my vision difficulties, I was able to develop strategies to make these experiences better. So for instance, if possible, I visit the restaurant beforehand to map out the environment without the crowds of people and at times when I'm calm and relaxed. This gives my brain a better chance of actually mapping the environment as accurately as possible. Even better, if it is something that I have control over, I pick the restaurant that I'm familiar with and one that I know is not too noisy, has good lighting and is not cluttered and crowded. When at the restaurant, I also choose where to sit based on a number of factors, including what am I going to be facing into when at the table. So I would definitely choose not to be facing into a scene such as that, and instead try and find a place where I'm sitting so I'm facing into a blank wall like this. I also have to think about whether I'm sitting on the furthest to the right, which takes into account my right hemianopia and means that I won't be ignoring anyone to my right. I would also organise it so that I would arrive at the restaurant early and have the opportunity to build up the visual scene slowly, as opposed to arriving late and having to try and process the overwhelming scene all at once. And that is really important. If I arrive when everyone's already there, it's just an overwhelming task straight away, and it's really hard. Whereas if I arrive first and then watch other people turn up, it makes a huge difference. If I was meeting someone, I would tell them where I would stand and ask them to find me. And if they want to greet me with a kiss on the cheek, make sure that they actually let me know that they're there and they're going to do that. So instead of me having to try and look around the crowd and find people, I stand in one place and say, you find me, that's where I'm going to be. While at the restaurant, if I'm starting to feel overwhelmed, I try and find a quiet place inside if possible, or outside if not, for some time out. I use this time to reset myself and give my brain a chance to rest. For this, I use mindfulness, which is something I have found makes a huge difference. And finally, when I get to the point that I feel that I cannot handle it anymore, I go home, because I'm an adult and I can control these things. But the reason that I have all these strategies is because my CVI has been diagnosed, and I have a clear understanding of how it impacts me on a daily basis. I have also explained my issues and needs to the people around me so that they are able to understand and can help when needed. Now, with this information fresh in your mind, I want you to imagine a child with CVI trying to go through life and having to face a somewhat identical experience to that of me going to a restaurant almost every day in their classroom environment. Because as an educator of children with visual impairments, this is what I see all the time. Let's start with a child who is fortunate enough to have been diagnosed with CVI. Not fortunate that they have CVI, but fortunate that they have been diagnosed with CVI. But the people around him or her have not been provided with the right information to help them to understand what this child's needs are. What are they having to deal with? Do they have to face a classroom that is so busy and cluttered that they are unable to map out the environment because they are continuously distracted by all the visual information that bombards them in every direction they turn? This is a classroom of a new entrant teacher. These are 5-year-olds sitting in this classroom. Is the pace of the learning environment so fast that it is difficult for them to keep up? Do they have any tools to help them keep up with their peers? Are they able to read the material they are provided with? Is it the right size? Font size? Is it increased line spacing? Or is it clutter-free? Or is it tiny writing with no line spacing and lots of clutter? Is their true learning potential understood? Are they given special considerations for assessments? For instance, working in a quiet, uncluttered environment with no distractions. This is a really important one because, as Helen was saying, there's no stupid brain, but if you have not got the right environment around you, then you become stupid. And I had a really good example of this in my last year at college. I was sitting we call it bursary exam to get university entrance, and I was sitting English, and I was given half an hour extra to do the exam on top of the normal 3 hours. But instead of being in a quiet separate room away from everyone, I was in the same hall that everyone else was. There was also building work going on in the office area that didn't stop until the rest of the students came in. So for the first 20 minutes I had to try and work with building noise as well. And then at about 20 past 12, the rest of the students started coming in, so I was completely distracted. By the time everyone else sat down and started to do their exam, I was in complete Cvi Meltdown, and I got 24% in the exam, bearing in mind that I was trying to go to university to do law. Is the place where they sit the same every day, and is it easy to find? Or does it move around all the time? Or is it an area that is so cluttered they are unable to find where they're sitting and they have to remap the area every time they enter the room? So this is a classroom that I have set up for one of my students with, he's got cerebral palsy and CVI. This is not within the classroom. He comes out of the classroom for a little bit of period, and where that black sheet is on the side was a box of shelves of journals, school journals. So it was completely cluttered. So I went in there and simply said it needs to be decluttered, and I came back and this is what the school had done. It was fantastic. Does the furniture and resources in the classroom stay in the same place, or does it get moved often? Do the children get alerted to the fact that things are moved, or are they just left struggling to find something or walking into a bookcase that wasn't there yesterday? Do they have to move to different locations within the school environment, for instance, different classrooms, libraries, gyms, assessment halls and lunch areas? Have they been familiarised with these routes before school started? But then can they move around the school environment when there are lots of other children moving around the same time? Are they provided with support, such as sighted guide to move around? So for instance, you might have seen me walking around here, and I'll continue walking around here by myself without any guide. But you take me to an airport or a busy restaurant, I will latch on to the person next to me. Normally my husband is my guide dog. He's come over here especially just to fill that role. But I travel around using sighted guide. But children don't know about this and don't think about this, and they need to be shown that it's okay to do this. Are they given support to help them recognise their friends at break times and during social interactions? Recognising faces. For instance, do their friends know to tell them where they are so they don't have to struggle in trying to recognise everyone? So if you're in a classroom with a playground environment where everyone's wearing the same thing, everyone's wearing the same uniform, how are you going to find your friend? An example for a child that I work with, what we did is we set it up so that the children wore badges of a different colour of his friends, and it became cool and exciting to who was going to be his friend that day and who was going to get to wear the badge, and it made it easier for him to find his friends. Is their need for quiet time and the opportunity to reset and recharge their batteries acknowledged, and are they provided with suitable locations to do this? Are they allowed to go out of the classroom for some quiet time and away from the clutter, or do they go to a place that's even more cluttered and more noisy? And I think the most important thing to take away, do they know it's okay to find things hard and to ask for help? Do they know it's okay to say to you, I can't do that, and I'm tired and I'm struggling? Now, what about a child that's not been diagnosed with CVI? What is going on for them? So a child that hasn't got that diagnosis at all. Have they been diagnosed with something else like ADHD, autism, dyspraxia, dyslexia or learning difficulties? Are the wrong strategies then being used to support them because they have the wrong diagnosis? Or maybe it's only half a diagnosis. Maybe they do have autism, but they also have a vision impairment that's not been considered. Or have they not been diagnosed with anything at all and are just been classed as children with behavioural issues? What about a child that is unable to communicate that they have a different normal and are unable to tell you that the classroom environment is scary, that they don't know where they are and they don't know why they are there? This is important because, as I have highlighted, adults with CVI struggle in situations that most take for granted, such as going out for dinner and mingling with their peers. Yet children with CVI face this kind of situation every day, sometimes with no allowances for their visual disabilities and no strategies to make life easier for themselves. So we need to help children with CVI and those supporting them to better understand the visual difficulties that they are dealing with, so that no one is living in a visual wilderness. Because after living in a visual wilderness for almost half of my life, I don't want anyone else to have to go through that. And once we know what a child's different normal is, we can work together to build strategies to help ensure that every child is meaningfully engaged in the world around them in whatever context suits them. We need to show these children that the world does not have to be so scary. Thank you.